But the real magic here is what I'll call the democratization of technology.
Hi, everyone. It's Penelope Prudd, Accenture's Chief Information Officer here, and I'm happy you can all join us today as we speak with Adam Burden. Adam is Accenture's technology lead for North America, and today with Adam, we're going to talk about low-code capabilities and what they mean for organizations. Adam's going to share some of his expertise about what advantages low-code can bring to companies and what they need to be thinking about as low-code begins to enter more and more into our everyday vocabulary in information technology departments. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Penelope. This topic is one that I've been following for a number of years, and it's really exciting to see it on the forefront of many of our technology leaders' minds now, because we've had this conviction for such a long time that it's going to be an important field. So I couldn't be more excited to have an opportunity to chat with you about it and share my enthusiasm for this space.
Super. So let's jump right into it then. We're hearing a lot of people throw around the term low code today, right? Can you start by just explaining to the audience a little bit about what exactly low code means to you and how it works?
This is actually a really good way to start this discussion because I do think that there's some terminology problems out there. First of all, we have started really breaking this down into what we'll call three categories of code. We have what we call pro code, which is exactly what you think it is. It's code only, right? It's people that are writing software programmers that are writing applications, but in code. And that is professional developer territory. And then you have this sort of middle ground, which is what we call low code. Low code has often a little bit of code in it. It doesn't necessarily have it, but I'm going to talk about what I mean by that in a second. But it has usually models, metadata, and you use processes of forward engineering basically to generate applications. Sometimes it's called scaffolding as well. Just like when you're assembling a building or something like that, you use the scaffolding, and it's a way for you to say very quickly, this is what I want an application to do, and it'll assemble all the parts around it really that you need. And you kind of go in and fill in the middle with a little bit of code, and some of the tools don't require it at all, which brings me to the third category, which is no code. There is definitely, we'll call it total codeless development with no code. This is where people are only using models and metadata to build things. And I'd say, when you think about people who are truly in this category of citizen developer, they're the ones that are the business users that don't necessarily have a technical background that can pick up these tools, be able to use them to create productive applications for their department. So there's really three categories out there, and that's what we really define this low code area is. You've got pro code, you've got low code, which is a little bit of code, and then no code at all, which is really just generation of applications that the citizen developer can take on. In that middle category, that low code category, it's kind of like a hybrid. We have folks in there that come from all walks of life that work in low code because they can choose the degree to which they actually have to write software inside of that. Sometimes it's very little, sometimes it's a lot, but it's a way for them to accelerate development. So that's a little bit about the definition of what low code is all about.
Thanks for clarifying. And while you're on it, can you talk a little bit about why low code's popularity is exploding right now? What are the competitive advantages it can offer to a company?
This is something it's funny. We've been predicting this for years, right? And I don't know. I have a bad habit of predicting things way too early that are going to happen. But we have definitely reached that now with this area. And the question is why? What's occurring now that has really made this so popular? I think there's a couple of factors. One is you've seen this explosion of agile development and the pace of technology moving faster than it ever has in history. And you also see this adoption by the business side of organizations who are saying, why can't I get application changes or do things faster, kind of like in a way that's going to allow me to enjoy the benefits of those systems much sooner than what we would see from traditional projects. It's in that perspective, that belief in those organizations that has really spawned this desire to be able to do citizen development, or sometimes called DIY development, where they can build things themselves. But the real magic here is what I'll call the democratization of technology. And I'm going to give you a great analogy for this. If you look back at the history of artificial intelligence, for example, artificial intelligence was like the domain of extremely deep pocketed enterprises for such a long time. It required incredible amounts of investment, curation of these very expensive data sets to be able to even teach the smallest of models on recognition of images, for example. What you saw in, let's say, the last couple of decades, maybe the last decade or so, really has been a democratization of that, where the cloud providers begin to make these AI tools, and maybe more so the compute resources, available at the fingertips of people that were working in the artificial intelligence field. So no longer do they necessarily have to have a deep-pocketed investor or a university apparatus for them to be able to do AI work. And it spawned this incredible era of innovation that we've seen in the AI space. I mean, entirely new thinking about models and things like adversarial networks and stuff. And that's what we're seeing happen right now with cloud and the development of cloud applications. And low code is something, as I said earlier, it's been around for a while. We've been watching it. But now what we're really observing is that this democratization of cloud in the application development space is now creating this explosion innovation. And it's innovation that you're seeing come out in terms of the number of tools that are available and the domain specific languages on this. We have the hyperscalers like Amazon and their Honeycode solution. We've got independent companies, like Mendex and OutSystems and others, but they've all started to make available their tool sets in cloud, and it's at the fingertips of people to be able to do. Every enterprise knows and has really embraced this journey for them to be more digital. They want to be able to take advantage of these systems because what they want to do is that they want to take their employees and enable them to, sometimes what we call is like automate the ordinary and unleash the extraordinary. And by putting that innovation at their fingertips, they're enabling them to do more than they had ever in the past. And I really think that it's been that democratization of these technologies which have really made that difference. And we're going to continue to see this at Penelope. I think that we're really just on the edge of something here where the tools that are available right now, they're quite varied. They're all over the map. It's kind of like what we saw with platform as a service several years ago, where there were hundreds of different tool sets, and it's now consolidated down to maybe a dozen or so, of really popular ones. I think that this space is going to be like that for a while. It's up to companies, though, to enable their employees, to be able to use these tools in the right way. And I think this popularity is just going to continue to expand and grow because many of them feel like that they need this innovation to be competitive in this in this world of digital enterprises. And they're right. And low code, no code type solutions are absolutely a path for them to get there. So that's been driving the popularity.
Well, Adam, what you're saying is really ringing my bell because when I think about what's happening inside our own Accenture house, we're using the power of Microsoft platform tools like Power Platform to help extend people's workspaces, to come up with new ways to connect, to fill niches of functionality that can be difficult to reach from other big packages. But it leads you to kind of an interesting question to ponder, right? Which is, what is actually the impact of these low-code tools going to be on packaged software applications and SaaS providers? How do you think their worlds will interact?
Okay, well, that's for another podcast, maybe, Penelope, because I've actually done a whole nother series of things around something I call the buy versus build equation that's changing. But let me comment on that a little bit later. First of all, I think most of the major software organizations, pick on ServiceNow, SAP, et cetera, they've started to build more low-code type tools inside of their solution. So SAP has cloud platform, Salesforce has done this with Lightning and others, and then we also have the MAG providers. Started to do things. You just mentioned Microsoft and what they've done with Power. We've got Amazon, who has been, or AWS, doing some things with Honeycode, and Google's with AppSheets. These are going to continue to I think expand in popularity and further make available to lots and lots of different entities that are out there. And they'll even do it like at educational levels as well. But the thing that I think is really interesting inside of this is that when companies are now looking at this, and why am I saying that the buy versus build equation is changing, is that they're evaluating for themselves, hey, what are the things that really make us competitively different out in the market? What are the things that enable us to move more rapidly and to capture, more business, delight our customers, our business partners, our employees? They're trying to figure out what are the things that that are more customer facing of those applications, more employee direct facing, so sometimes referred to as the systems of engagement that are out there. And for those systems of engagement, they're not the human capital management systems typically. They're not really the systems which are the financial and back office systems. There's not a lot of differentiation necessarily that you can get out of those. But for the order to cash application, absolutely. For the warehousing systems, for sure, right? So think about that. And in the buy versus build equation is changing, which I've also written a bit of a blog about as well. I talk about this, and I hypothesize that over time, you're going to see that major software vendors are really going to open up that and recognize that there's elements of their applications that customers are just not willing to wait for them to decide that a feature is important enough for them to build and maybe release it in 6 months for a year, that they need to build that stuff now. So they're going to open up their products to be able to expand in ways. And some of the more progressive ones have already done this. And others that don't, I think they're going to be more threatened by some of these startup type tools who will build applications around them that allow those customers to move faster and more agile in order to be competitive. And I think we're going to continue to see that phenomenon really come out more and more in the future. And this popularity of low code, I think, is going to change the way that many enterprises look at software packages, because they may conclude in some cases that the buy versus build equation, which for so long has been tilted in the favor of commercial and off-the-shelf packages or COT systems, that it may make sense for them to actually build some of these things themselves. Now, a word of caution here. For some of the really big enterprise systems, you talk about things with thousands of applications. Don't underestimate the complexity in building something like that. And while many of these tools, Power among them, are quite capable of handling, large number of users, the sophistication of what it takes, to build, like an ERP application or a financial system, it's quite complex. So tackle the things that are really important. Inside this is the message that I'd leave you, the things that are going to give you new systems of engagement, and focus on that as potential uses cases for low code and no code, and use it in places where, especially that the software vendor themselves has started to embed that capability inside of their product. And I really think that it's going to open up a new era of creativity in enterprises, and they're really going to feel like it's made them more competitive. So it's an interesting time to be a big software platform vendor in this space, because they really need to move rapidly where they don't already have a capability like this to enable it. And just look around. We've just seen ServiceNow make a similar announcement, and I think you're going to see it from many of the others in the near future as well.
It's an interesting vision for the future, Adam, and one which is rapidly coming on us, right? So pulling it back to the present, one of the things we always like to do on this podcast series is just leave our listeners with some practical tips, everyday tips about things they need to be thinking about right now on some of these technology waves that we're getting ready to ride. Can you share any of your practical tips on what to do today with our listener group?
Yeah, for sure. I got a couple of them. One is low code and no code systems are a great way to enable maybe the non-technical part of our communities that we work with to become more technical. So when you think about, messages that were around inclusiveness and recruitment and the scarcity of talent that's available, the ability to rapidly teach someone how to use some of these system and application building tools has reached a point where you don't necessarily need a computer science degree to build very functional applications. And I think that's a really important lesson learned out of my experience having worked with this. So I feel that we've really turned a corner here. One of my favorite movies, Penelope, is Ratatouille. Have you ever seen this movie, Ratatouille? You know which one I'm talking about?
I have indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a really cute story. It was a Pixar movie, and there was a chef in it, and I think his name was Chef Gustav, and he used to do this television show, and it's like anyone can cook, right? Well, I really think anyone can code, and these tools are giving us the ability to do that because it's allowing people that don't necessarily have the technical backgrounds to go do that. So I think it's an important way for you to expand your horizons in terms of, recruiting from non-traditional sources. And look, another angle to look at this too is you have many enterprises doing massive shifts into cloud right now. And they've got an awful lot of legacy developers that might have more familiarity with mainframes or AS400s or other things. Well, I'm telling you, their tribal knowledge that they have, their expertise of business processes and systems inside of that enterprise and their functional knowledge is so important. Teach them how to use these low code solutions to continue to build and define new applications for tomorrow. It's a great way to transition existing talent that you have in a way that doesn't require you to expect them to become full stack developers or pro coders. It is a very different world that's available now for you to do that as an enterprise, transitioning some of your workforce into cloud as an enterprise. So I really think those are important lessons that are out there. I got one more for you that I think is quite significant. So some of the early adopters in the low code, no code space, Penelope, they got ahead of their skis a little bit. And the reason that happened was their appetite for this really was quite strong, and they really released low code abilities quite broadly. Now they have an awful lot of tools that do very similar things because the standards weren't there and there wasn't a lot of controls around which ones were going to be used. But more difficult has been is the security that you want to have in place around that, the guardrails around things, the reusability. Like if you want everybody to use the same authentication service for any applications that they're building, you need to build that into the governance for this, and you need to customize a lot of these tools so that there's standard frameworks that people will use and follow going forward. Some organizations that we've been working with have really taken this to a very sophisticated level. And I'll credit Accenture as having done this as well, because as you know, some of my teams have built low code applications inside of Accenture for our own purposes and use, is that we tier that and we have different ranges that allow sort of the, even like the back office person who's doing processing, they can build their own application, but it's got controls around it. So it doesn't create a security risk for us, but allows them to automate many of the tasks that they otherwise would have performed manually in the past. So think about that as you're rolling this out in your enterprise. Think about how putting the right governance and guardrails around this. One of the best thinkers in this space, I really admire him. He always says it's best to go slow to go fast when it comes to low code, and that's very true. Roll this out a little bit, get your governance and processes right, and then you can go super fast. Because if you try to go too fast, it's just going to make you come to a grinding halt. I've seen that happen in a couple places that were very early adopters in this area. So there's a couple of great lessons for you. Go slow to go fast, and everyone can code, courtesy of Ratatouille.
Well, Adam, I thank you so much for coming today and sharing your thoughts around this whole low code environment. It's been fascinating and enlightening for me, and I've learned a few new terms like scaffolding that I'll be using going forward. I'm sure our listeners got a kick out of it as well. So thank you for taking the time. And it's always a pleasure to speak with you and hear what's the latest thinking.
I really, I hope that people really, when they're listening to this podcast, that they really, take to heart the enthusiasm that we Accenture, me, myself personally have for this space and the innovation that's going to be possible as enterprises take on low code and no code. It's really kind of unleashing an entirely new world of possibility, and it's exciting times ahead. So thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about it. And I look forward to having a chat with you again soon. Take care.
Thank you for joining today's podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the Accenture CIO podcast series on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Find the full CIO 24/7 podcast series and additional ways to subscribe at accenture.com/CIO podcast.